Hey there, this is Jen T. Grace, founder of Publish Your Purpose, and I am here with Steve Clarke, who is the author of Mind the Gaps. Steve, how are you today?
Great. Yes, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're finally at this kind of finish line of the writing and the publishing, starting line of the promotion and all the other stuff that comes with it. But I'm just excited that we're here and we can talk about your book and kind of celebrate that you have crossed this big milestone of getting your first book out into the world. So just kind of starting point, like how does that make you feel that you're like finally at this place of like this book has been birthed?
It's a huge relief, right? To just be able to check that off my bucket list, as it were. It's probably been a couple of years in the making, from the beginning of starting to write the book. So just getting it completed feels like a huge accomplishment, but also kind of a weight off my shoulders as well.
Yeah. 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 So let's talk about what Mind the Gaps is about.
Yeah. So Mind the Gaps is, and it's kind of a play on the word from if you've ever been to the tube stations in London, it's mind the gaps. But in this case, we're mining the gaps, which is looking for gaps in your various different operations. Could be supply chain. So you're using data that you have readily available to be able help you identify where you can improve your performance. But it's not only just kind of from a management performance perspective, but it's also from a job fulfillment perspective as well. In that there's, I spent about 25, 30 years in corporate America, and and now I'm consulting, but I can look back and say, wow, there was a lot of frustrating aspects to that. There's a lot of things that were broken that could be fixed. And so I feel like I understand the tools that can help fix a lot of the frustrations as well as improving performance. So I've taken those tools and then, so it's good to know the tools, but then you need to know how to use them and when to use them. So I provided a framework. So I've distilled all the best tools that I know of, and then provided a framework on when to use each tool. Starting from here's the strategic objective that we're trying to achieve, all the way through to here's how to manage the project to get whatever initiative will help you reach that objective completed successfully.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so this framework that you have, is this a framework that you've been using in your own kind of consulting business over the years and just kind of formalized it in the form of this book?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. And it's one of the benefits of writing a book is that I didn't have a framework before the book started, not a formal one. I didn't start with a framework in mind. I guess there was a framework in my head, but it was when I started writing it down that I realized, oh, there is this framework, or it helped me formulate it and define it a lot better than before I'd even started writing the book. So that part was very helpful too. It's actually helped my consulting business because it's helped me kind of define what it is I do.
Yeah, I do say that often to others that, there's so many benefits of a book, but this is a really fantastic benefit because then you are able to kind of formalize this process and methodology and just kind of way that you approach it, which then is now the book and other people can learn from it. They can implement it, but then also it could turn into some kind of course that you create later. It could turn into some other type of program or training that you work with other, companies or individuals around. So it's really awesome to hear that, through this evolution, your methodology has kind of risen to the surface.
Yeah, no, it's been very interesting from that perspective. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting just to be writing down everything I knew and trying to make sense of it. But it turned out to be something very different than when it started.
Hmm. And if you think about kind of your big picture goal for this book, what are you hoping that, someone who picks this book up and reads it, like what are you hoping that they're going to gain from it?
So I think any organization could benefit from it. It's in terms of trying to streamline and make it less complicated to actually make things happen and make improvements. Right? I found that corporations seem to make it much more complicated than it needs to be,
Mhm.
um, and that's not only frustrating for the executives, but it's also frustrating for the people that are trying to make it happen as well.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm hoping is that people read it and it provides them a you know a playbook for how to make improvements going forward. And it was written specifically for supply chain because that's where I've spent most of my career. But when I look back at it, it could actually be applied to any kind of operational type of situation.
Mhm. And for someone who might be watching this and they're not really sure what you mean when you say it's kind of written for supply chain, of course, there's a broader application, but like what does that actually look like in the supply chain?
What does supply chain look like? Or
Yeah, yeah, just kind of like a for folks watching.
yeah, so well, it's funny. After COVID, I think supply chain became kind of a household term, whereas previously my kids would be like, "What is it you do?"
Mhm.
Um, Now they're, "Oh yeah, maybe supply chain's important." Uh, but yeah, it's very broad, encompassing all the steps that it takes from uh, start. It ends with getting the product to the customer, and then it's everything in between, both the material flow, information flow,
Mhm.
and flow of money that
Mhm.
it requires in order to get it from the supplier all the way to the final customer. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so your book is showing people how to identify those gaps and how to be more efficient in their processes.
Yeah, so because supply chain, as I described it, is pretty broad, it
Mhm.
really starts with what is your strategic objective,
Mhm.
right? So let's say your strategic objective is improving on-time delivery to your customer,
Mhm.
right? So that's a key metric generally for supply chain organizations. So then, and that's the starting point, right? Is you need an objective. It's like any journey. You need to start with the end in mind,
Mhm.
right? So that's what you need to define first, and then there's about 7 steps that take you from, okay, how do we uh, make that objective happen
Mhm.
as quickly as possible, going through, there's about 7 different steps.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great. And then is there a I don't know, certain company size or, something that like if someone's watching this and they're like, wow, I know that I have gaps that I want to try to figure out how to improve. Is there like a certain, I don't know, whether it's an employee size, revenue size, is there anything to kind of help people identify, is this book for me or not?
uh, I think it applies across the board. Well,
Mhm.
I know it applies across the board because I've worked for organizations that have been, multi-billion-dollar organizations, but also startup companies that maybe 100 employees or less.
Mhm.
So it's yeah, I think it applies across the board. The only thing I would say is the bigger you get, the more benefit you can get
Mm.
from it, right? So yeah.
Mhm. And you said that you spent much of your career in kind of supply chain. How did you end up there to begin with?
Yeah. Well, I knew I wanted to be in manufacturing. That's kind of just where my family was always kind of blue collar, that type of thing. And so I knew I wanted to be manufacturing, but I knew I was kind of more analytical. So it didn't really suit me to be, say, working as a supervisor on the shop floor. It made more sense for me to take a step back and be the that be responsible for some of the analytics.
Hmm.
So I got involved in production planning, which suits that criteria, and then I found I was quite ambitious, and what I found is that there's this thing called supply chain, which when I started wasn't as well known as it is today. So
Hmm.
supply chain is a broader application of production planning, is just one element of supply
Hmm.
chain. And so for a young ambitious production planner, supply chain was kind of uh, the best direction for
Hmm.
me. And so that's so I started to explore that and get educated more in supply chain, and kind of climbed up the corporate ladder within the supply chain organizations.
Hmm. Wow. And so then what was the point where you chose to leave corporate and strike out on your own?
Yeah, I only did it about 3 years ago, right at the beginning of COVID. So probably wasn't the best timing, but it was COVID. It was a COVID-related layoff that I had that made me take a step back and start to think about what it is I want to do next. So yeah, it's been about 3 years. Um, I wish I'd done it. I could have done it 15 years ago,
Mhm.
at least. But you know how it is. It's difficult striking out on your own. Consulting back then meant being on the road for 80% of the time. Now
Mhm.
I'm on the road because of the benefits of COVID, about maybe 1% of the time. So
Mhm.
having a small young family, etc., was kind of difficult to make happen. But now they're all grown up, and so I don't have those concerns as much now.
Mhm.
So I've went out on my own and never looked back in terms of, it's been great. It's been everything that I've wanted out of it. Primarily, because it's all project focused. It's not something where I have to kind of maintain a status quo. Where in a lot of corporate jobs, you're doing a lot of things that are not project related, that feel like it's rote,
Mhm.
which I wasn't enjoying. So now it's 100% project related work, which is a
Mhm.
lot of fun for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I think there's so many people where COVID was kind of the kick out of the nest that folks needed to kind of grab that entrepreneurial spirit that was always within them, to be able to say, all right, there's no sense in me trying to look back and deal with corporate again when I can just be doing this myself and be more involved in the part of it that I actually love doing.
Yeah. So I said COVID was probably not the best time, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. So it wasn't a good time because business was going through a rough time
Mhm.
during that period. But also because everybody was locked down, it was actually a great time because it gave me a lot of time to start building the infrastructure and
Mhm.
do a lot of things that are necessary to get a business off the ground,
Mhm.
which I probably wouldn't have had time to do if I was working 9 to 5 and commuting
Mhm.
and doing all the things that people normally do.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so what is who is your ideal client? Like what does that kind of look like right now?
Yeah. So for most of my career, I've worked in supply chain, and for most of that, I've worked in life sciences, so
Mhm.
medical device, biotech, pharmaceutical. So that's my target market primarily is within life sciences. That's my expertise. But a lot of what I do, or almost all of what I do, can be broadly um, utilized for any industry.
Mhm.
Whether it's retail, automobiles, whatever it is, it can be applied. But I've targeted specifically life science
Mhm.
companies.
Mm, that's awesome. That sounds great. And is there any individual role outside of someone who might be part of the supply chain organization internally that could benefit from this, or be a champion to get it in front of the right person?
Um, I think in terms of the book, I think any level of the organization would benefit from it. It's the kind of set of tools, I suppose, that kind of framework that I wish I'd had 25 years ago, just to help. The thing is that I've taken so many different certifications in supply chain and project management, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. I have all these letters after my name, but it's not generally what you find is there's only a small proportion of what you actually learn is actually utilized. So I've distilled all that into so really taking years of learning and distilled it into what is practical in the real world. So I wish I'd had it as a starting out, but it's also, like I said, it's helping organizations reach a strategic objective, which by definition it's something that executives would appreciate. So, and it's everybody in between. Yeah. So I don't think there's a certain level that wouldn't benefit.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I feel like, talking about your book, it might sound on the surface that this is a big and hefty textbook style type of book, and it is not. And so I feel like kind of calling attention to that, I think, is a good thing, because it is, just a manageable size where it's not going to be an overwhelming read. And I think, there's some intentionality behind making sure that it didn't feel too overwhelming for somebody. So it really does kind of provide that high level, here's a framework you can use to do better and to improve in your organization. And then, of course, if they're getting their way through it and they realize, wow, there's an opportunity here, I could use Steve's help, then they can certainly reach out and contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll be more than glad to help.
Yeah, and so your website is scrolling along the bottom of the screen. So it's biosupplyconsulting.com. So your book is available, where anyone wants to purchase their book. I know Amazon is one of the places that you specifically are driving people to. However, if they want to buy it on Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, any of the popular places, by all means, the book is accessible wherever you would like to purchase. I personally am a fan of bookshop.org because they're also a certified B Corp, which is what PYP is, which just means that there's a greater commitment to people and profit, and people and planet before profit is kind of like the B Corp mantra. And I love that Bookshop is also that. And so they're an online independent bookstore. And so however you get the book, that is the ultimate goal, is to be able to take this into your organization and do something, do something meaningful with it. And so in terms of people engaging with you, so they can certainly go to your website, they can reach out to you there. I know that you have an active LinkedIn newsletter. So if someone's just kind of looking to get a little bit more information about what your thought leadership looks like prior to buying the book, potentially, they can certainly check you out on LinkedIn as well. And I feel like you're relatively easy to find, even with a name that I feel like there's probably a number of Steve Clarkes on LinkedIn. I find you very easy to still find.
Yeah, or just instead of using my name, if that's difficult, just use Biosupply Consulting. I've got a business page there, and through that you can find me.
Perfect. That's awesome. Are there any last things that you want to bring up or mention before we close out?
No, well, just the whole process of publishing a book. This is the first time I've gone through it, and I didn't realize that it was that complicated, or it's not so much complicated, but there are a lot of different steps to it.
Yeah.
So I would just say anybody that's thinking of writing a book, especially for the first time, don't go it alone. I think PYP did a great job in helping me get it there after the book was written. So I would strongly advise for any writer to don't try to self-publish, because maybe you can figure it out, but it would have been. There were quite a few steps where we had to do some rework, but if I'd done it by myself, we wouldn't be talking here today. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think you just kind of framed it pretty well, because it's not that it's complicated. It is time consuming and it can be confusing. So, I
Mhm.
tell people all the time, like, don't go it alone. Obviously work with PYP. That's fantastic. But, find somebody to support you on this journey, because it is much easier when you have, someone that's along the ride with you, rather than kind of getting to what you think is a finish line and realizing that you missed a dozen steps that are going to dramatically impact what you're up to. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you
Yeah.
saying that. Yeah. And for you, this is your first of two books. So, at some point we will be back and having another conversation sometime in 2024 where we are celebrating another book. So you are really in the process of publishing one, and then also still writing and editing a second one. So that is definitely a Herculean effort to be doing two at once.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting there.
Yep, yep. And that's how slow and steady wins the race, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your time so much, Steve. This has been a great conversation. I really, really appreciate you.
All right. Thank